Hi everyone, my name is Sarah and I am the co-founder of Inner Summits. Welcome to Pathways to Calm. This is a how-to series aimed to help you find calm either through insight or practical exercises under 5 minutes. It is an unedited series because let's face it, we're not trying to become YouTube sensations here. So today we're going to talk about how stress impacts the human brain and where to start to make some changes. Understanding how the brain functions and how it responds to stress is actually the first step into trying to reverse things. Because if we don't know how the stress pattern kind of exists inside of us, then it would be really hard. We're sort of shooting in the dark in terms of trying to interrupt that process. So we have what we call the nervous system, can be divided into two. We have the central nervous system, which is our brain and our spinal cord. And we also have the peripheral nervous system, which is in charge of all the sort of involuntary and sometimes voluntary actually pieces. It's particularly for our purpose is in charge of fight or flight or freeze responses. So sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous responses all happen in there. Today we're going to focus on the central nervous system and particularly the brain. So if I were to pull up my brain model here, we have one brain but three parts or three systems in it. The first part is the logical brain, the thinking brain. Sometimes it's called the frontal lobe or the executive brain. And essentially it's in charge of planning, execution, rational thinking, higher order and complex thinking patterns are connected to this. I call it the CEO because essentially it sits at the top of the food chain and has sort of, it's a command center essentially. Now, we have a second part to our brain or system, which is called the limbic system. You've probably heard of your amygdala. And that is essentially this part of the brain. Our amygdala kind of lives in that system. And it is our emotional brain. It is the part of our brain, maybe you've heard the word mammalian brain. It's a part of our brain that's in charge of, detecting emotions, but also scanning for danger and safety. And so I actually call that the smoke detector and alarm system. It's also where trauma memories get stuck or stored. And so it's a good thing to sort of like know for any future videos that you might watch. The last part of the brain is essentially our sensory motor brain. You can call it the reptilian brain, survival brain. It is this part of the brain essentially, so the back of the head. And you can just call it body brain. Let's not get fancy here. And that is in charge of our fight, flight, freeze, and all the survival responses that we have. So what happens when we're stressed? When we are stressed, our frontal lobe essentially goes offline. Our CEO takes a little break. Our smoke detector, right inside, is constantly scanning, and it scans danger and it sounds the alarm, which tells the reptilian brain, the body brain, go. What it's saying, you're in survival, something bad is happening, you need to go to fight, flight, or freeze response, right? And if you look at some of the research, it actually tells you that when we're under stress and when the system is activated, we actually kind of lose some blood flow and oxygen in the frontal lobe. So we literally can't access it, which makes it hard to think and makes it hard to, regulate our system. What also happens is our brain wave distribution changes. So we start to make either a lot of theta brain waves or which are like really slow brain waves where in places in our brain that need to actually be on, or we're making a lot of high beta brain waves, which is like anxious brain waves essentially. So there are two ways to regulating our nervous system. One way is what's called top-down. Top-down is a lot of these cognitive therapies or talk therapies are based on this, and where you're trying to straighten this part of the brain to calm down the rest of it. That works to some extent, but it can be very limited if you're under constant chronic stress or constant chronic anxiety and or in a trauma situation. The other way to regulate your nervous system is bottom up. So you're trying to get these parts of the brain to sort of slow down, and not just your brain, but slow down your body, pull it out of the survival response, and consequently get the thinking brain and the rest of that system to sort of like calm down. So here's an example of top-down self-regulation strategy. So let's say you're feeling very, very anxious and your thinking brain tells the amygdala, hey, these are thinking traps, these are cognitive distortions, and here's the evidence that tells you why it's not true. So it's trying to use logic to beat or challenge that fire, that activation that's happening here, that alarm system that's on. That works sometimes for some folks, but I think for a lot of us, and long term, that is not going to be an effective strategy, especially if our stress is chronic or anxiety is really, really high, or we're experiencing trauma, or that we've been having it for a very, very, very long time. An example of bottom-up strategy is going to be using this part of your brain to regulate the rest of the nervous system. So what that's going to look like is when we're feeling anxious, oftentimes we tighten, our shoulders kind of fold in, we hold our breath here. And so bottom-up strategy is going to say, hey, soften those shoulders, elongate that spine, take a breath. And by doing that, the nervous system is actually trying to tell the amygdala and the thinking brain non-verbally that things are okay. There's no need to sound the alarm, but it's doing it without trying to convince it. It's showing it in real time. And so while it's really, really important to have some top-down strategies to regulate our anxiety, it's going to be a game changer to build a good chunk of toolbox and resources that are bottom-up strategies to help regulate our nervous system.